as you know by now, I guess, this will be the first of what we hope to be a number of virtual tours as we show you Oakwood Cemetery and talk about some of the people who spend time here, so to speak. Robin is our filmographer here. She's shy about being on this side of the camera.
Hi, everyone.
Say hi, Robin.
Hello, hello.
She's there. And the theme of this talk today is from a line by English playwright Christopher Marlowe. It's called Overruled by Fate. And the point of his lines in his play was that we can try and do all sorts of things to govern our own lives, but in the end, fate will dictate what happens. And so we tried to pick out a few stories that would illustrate that today. We thought we would start with this fellow, Albert Johnson, a man who spent his life as a railroad man, a fellow who rolled up his sleeves, but as such probably did more to promote the growth and development of the city of Raleigh and the state of North Carolina than any politician. As a young railroad man, he was the fellow who drove the first locomotive called the Tornado into Raleigh in 1840. Now here's a little caution for everybody who comes and visits the cemetery. You can't always trust a tombstone, because his stone says it happened in 1842. That's incorrect. It happened with the opening of the new Capitol in 1840. And he stayed on in Raleigh as a mechanic, the lead mechanic for the Raleigh and Gaston Railroad. In fact, it's he who designed the big roundhouse that used to stand downtown. It's why when you go out McDowell Street and you take that swinging left curve to get on Capitol Boulevard, you're avoiding the spot of that old roundhouse that Albert Johnson designed. Johnson Street in downtown Raleigh is named for him and not another Raleigh boy named Andrew. Anyway, very important in the history of Raleigh. In fact, in the Centennial Parade of 1892, he rode a float with a likeness of the tornado as we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the founding of the city. He died an old, contented fellow. And you think, fate avoided him. Could it be? Well, let's see. There's more to this tale than you'll find at this spot, so we'll move somewhere else. We're doing something now that we really couldn't do on a walking tour because we're quite a ways away from Albert Johnson. We're now in the Beechwood section. Johnson is in the Anderson section. But we've come over here to visit with Albert's granddaughter. Now, Albert Johnson stayed with the Raleigh and Gaston for decades. In fact, until it became part of the Seaboard Airline Railroad system, which used to run diesel trains, streamliners, between the Northeast and Florida, for instance. They come through Raleigh. And it was on one of those occasions when the Palmland or Palmland Special was headed north from Florida up north to Raleigh, running the Seaboard line, that Elizabeth and two friends named Cooper, William and Mrs. Cooper, were in a car riding through the current state fairgrounds, and lo and behold, the diesel engine of the Palmland ran over their car and killed all three of them. In other words, the irony, fate finally caught up in a way with Albert Johnson, because he lived a long and very successful life. Alas, in 1948, fate caught up with him. His railroad, the Seaboard Airline, took the life of his granddaughter, Elizabeth. We're still in the Beechwood section. We just visited with Elizabeth Peel to our north, but we're at the south end of the Beechwood section at the gravesite of one John Lamson. Lampson's sort of a mysterious figure, as I'll explain, but he came to Raleigh as a young man and got a job with Edwards and Broughton, the publishing company here in town. And what was known in particular about him was his wartime record in World War I. You can see on his stone. He was a member of the 95th U.S. Aero Squadron, a fighter planes in World War I whose chief mission was to intercept German aircraft coming across the Western Front. He apparently did quite well. He was a sergeant with the 95th. By the way, those of you who know your history, it was the 95th Aero Squadron that Quentin Roosevelt lost his life with, the son of Teddy Roosevelt. So quite a renowned squadron in the U.S. Army during World War I. Lamson, as I said, went to work for Edwards and Broughton here in town, though he wasn't from Raleigh originally. And lo and behold, fate caught up with him. He went to take a swim at Lassiter's Pond, Lassiter Mill Pond, and they found, he disappeared, and they found his body later, declared a drowning. As I said, he was something of a mysterious person, and there may be more to his story than we know. People really didn't know much more about him than his war record. In fact, he had no family that people knew of, and it was his fellow employees at Edwards and Broughton who helped buy this marker for him. Again, as I say, something of a mysterious past, but in a way a glorious one. You see the various campaigns that he was with the 95th during the war. We're still at the southern end of the Beechwood section, not far from John Lamson, and I guess our lesson here is that fate knows no age. This is the gravesite of the Farmer family. There's no stone. And much of what we know about the Farmer family we know from ancestors who come to the cemetery and told us. But buried here is a young boy named Frederick Farmer Jr., whose father said the family lived right in Oakwood here, not far from where I'm standing, and whose father was an engineer for one of those diesels that ran between the Northeast and Florida. In fact, his family tells us that he was an engineer for the Orange Blossom Special. He retired, but they continued to live in Oakwood, and in 1918, the year of the Spanish flu, fate caught up with his son, Frederick Jr. The boy died at 8 years old and is buried in this plot. And the family tells us the boy had a dog. And the dog came and lay on the boy's grave until the dog itself, I should say, passed away too. It's a rather poignant story, again, of fate taking charge. We've come across the cemetery now to the Magnolia Hill section, which is off to my right. And I guess our lesson here is that fate can play tricks on us, perhaps even bringing together rivals that we wouldn't expect to be near. This is the lot of the Broughton family. Needham Broughton, a name you locals will know, one of our big high schools is named for him. He was a publisher. You've heard his name here this morning already. John Lamson worked for his company. Needham Broughton, not a well-educated man, but a man who supported education vigorously as a politician, as a donor and so forth, and so got the high school named for it. I think what he didn't expect was that there's another man right within eyesight of him that wound up here too. Let's go over across the street into the East Branch section and we'll visit him down the hill here. We've come across the road and we're now in the East Branch section within sight of the Broughton family up the hill there. And lo and behold, who do we find? But William G. Enlow, who also has a high school named for him in Raleigh, subsequent to Broughton High. Enlow was a theater owner in town who became mayor and did such a good job at keeping the peace during the 1960s and the Civil Rights era that the city thought so well of him that they would name another very special high school in Raleigh for him, William G. Enlow High. We hope you all are holding up well on our tour, not getting too tired. By the way, if there are complaints about the tour, we want to hear from you. Just mail it to our special box, Regina Saskatchewan. We'll be sure to get it. We're back in Magnolia Hill section where you met the Broughton family. This is Carl Woodruff. Carl Woodruff is one of 7 known Union soldiers in Oakwood Cemetery, 2 of them whom you'll meet on other tours in the Confederate Cemetery, believe it or not. Anyway, Carl Woodruff a decorated officer during the Civil War, stayed with the artillery divisions of the U.S. Army, actually had a gun emplacement named for him, the Woodruff Battery at the mouth of Manila Bay, till it was captured by the Japanese. He won, or was awarded, I should say, the Medal of Honor for his actions during the Civil War when he saved his artillery pieces from capture by the Union Army, or by the Southern Army, I should say. He is our only Medal of Honor winner. In fact, I think one of only 2 Medal of Honor winners represented here in Raleigh. You can see on this headstone that he's been recognized for that. But there's more to this story. There's more to Woodruff's story than meets the eye. As you see, he died in 1913, and his funeral, he'd been living in Raleigh. He married a Haywood, Effie Haywood, and his funeral was set here in Raleigh, to which his sister-in-law was going to come. She was the wife of a colonel in the U.S. Army. His name, Charles Winder Mason. He was infantry, unlike Woodruff artillerymen, but Mason put his wife on the train to come to Carl's funeral in Raleigh. This was out in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina. After she got on the train, before she even made it to Winston-Salem, Charles Mason died of a heart attack. So he wound up coming to Raleigh at for, in effect, the same time as Carl Woodruff. A trick of fate, if you will. Again, you see, July 1913, often what happens to us despite our best of intentions. We're in the Briggs section now. Actually, we're going to share this story with East Branch, where we just were. We generally think of fate as playing dirty tricks on us, but it's not always so. Sometimes fate does favors. And I think that's true in what's a famous Raleigh story. A lot of you will know it. If you don't, you should. And that's the Sherwood Bates sisters. We are at the grave of one of them, Mary Priscilla Bates, who went by Mamie. Mamie married Francis Sherwood, or Frank Sherwood, who passed away, and she was widowed with 2 sons, and she went to live with her sister, Grace Bates, whom you will meet in a moment. Both of them were in education. They were public school instructors. In fact, both for a long time worked at the Wiley School, which is still operating downtown. Mamie was the principal, and Grace taught there for many years. They lived together and were devoted to each other, so much so that they couldn't stand the thought of being without the other, and I think only half in jest they went around saying, "You be sure you're not going to die before me, or I won't die before you," and that sort of thing. Ha ha. It so happens that Mamie was at a dinner at the First Presbyterian Church downtown and had a stroke and went into a coma. And when her son Frank saw that, he went to tell her sister Grace, and when he was at their home, he found Grace dead of a heart attack. Eventually, a couple days later, Mamie herself passed away, never emerging from her coma. So in fact, both sisters passed away without knowing that the other had died at the same time. Again, fate, what seems like a dirty trick, in a way, did them both a favor. We're going to take a quick trip over to East Branch to see Grace Bates's very simple headstone. She never married, and she just has a headstone with 3 years on it. We've come away from the Sherwood Bates sisters. We are in the forest section of the cemetery, right off of the Moiety Circle, which is behind Robbinsville. And it occurs to us that some of you may want to come out and visit some of these grave sites, either the ones we've talked about or ones that you know of or otherwise. And just a warning, if you come in the warm weather, that this is ant season. You want to avoid anything that looks like an anthill, particularly at the base of some of these grave sites. And as a caution, if you do come out, Robin today has worn a sample of what not to wear. If you'll show us, Robin. You see she has open shoes. Oh, the ants would love to take advantage of that. And instead,
What's
you see,
that?
I'm prepared. So seriously, look out for ants. Come and visit us, but if you come, be sure you don't go home with some of those ants. So we're going over here to the Riddick family, which you'll hear about in other contexts. A rather tragic family, a whole row here, and we'll talk about, there's too much to talk about in one visit today, but we did want to talk about some of the families over here. These two headstones. This is Ivy Goodman Riddick, named for his father, Ivy, who was an MD, but Ivy Riddick Jr. took quite a contrary occupation. He went to work for British American Tobacco in China for several decades, and it was in the Far East that he met his wife. His wife, Margaret Cowan, who was born in Japan, and they were married, and when he retired, they moved back to Norfolk, Virginia. And in Norfolk, in 1956, Ivy Riddick Jr. passed away. And a funeral was arranged for him at First Baptist Church in downtown Raleigh. Margaret came from Norfolk to stay with her friend up in Lewisburg for Ivy's funeral the next day. However, the house where she was staying, she either fell down the steps as a result of a heart attack or had a heart attack as a result of falling down the steps. But one way or the other, she passed away, which meant that instead of a single funeral at First Baptist Church, they arranged a double funeral, one for Ivy and one for his wife, Margaret. We moved from the Riddicks over to the Heck section, and just a striking view of the cemetery that both Robin and I love. You see the office, and behind it the PNC building and the Wells Fargo building here on the right. Yes, fate can deal some harsh tricks and take us by surprise. And I guess there's no better example of that than John Whitelaw and his partner William Weir, who's we'll meet in a moment. Whitelaw, a stone carver from Scotland. He came to Raleigh having won the contract to build the bell tower at Christ Church in just a few years before the Civil War in the 1850s. And he has done many stones here in the cemetery. And he and William Weir, also a builder as well as a stone cutter, formed a partnership and took control of the old quarry out in east of Raleigh. It was the same quarry which provided the stone that's on the Capitol building, rebuilt in, of course, 1840. They were opening up the new quarry, which they hoped to, again, revive and make some money off of, and they were moving heavy equipment into the quarry, down a ramp, if you will. The axle on the wagon broke. It spilled the equipment onto both of them, killed almost instantly both men. This is in 1906, and again, Raleigh left two men who I think would have continued to create buildings as well as stonework had fate not intervened. It was a rather sad and certainly tragic event in our early 20th century history. Yeah, we've come over to the battle section to visit Whitelaw's partner, William Weir. You see a very handsome, this is a cavalry cross, by the way, with the three stones at the base very common Christian symbol, if you will, of the whole Trinity on many grave markers out here in Oakwood. You see Weir's name at the bottom. And his name, again, with 1906, the year of the disaster at the quarry, under his name. As we work our way through Battle Section, you see a sample, quite a good one, of the anthills we warned you about. You certainly don't want to step on that because you'll go home with souvenirs that you're sorry you have. We're still in the Battle Section, not far from William Weir. This is Mr. and Mrs. Andrew Sim, pronounced S-I-M, but spelled S-Y-M-E, a prominent name in mid-19th century Raleigh because his father was a newspaper man. J.W. Sim ran the Raleigh Register and was forced to leave town during the Civil War because he ran out of newsprint and that sort of thing, easier to get in Virginia at the time. Anyway, Andrew stayed on and became a prominent insurance salesman in Raleigh, and once again doing quite well. Played baseball on the side in the Raleigh leagues, and again, fate, a particularly, I think, unexpected, just as with Whitelaw and Weir, a completely unexpected, out of the blue fate deed, if you will. Andrew took a practice ride on a bicycle. Now, you may think that bicycles were the old push kind in those days. We're talking about the 1890s that you put. Not at all. If you see photos of bikes that were sold during that era, it's really hard to tell from a distance anyway, one of those bikes from some that we ride today. So he was out practicing on a bike and fell off. And he broke his arm in 2 places. Not extraordinary, except that infection set in, and he eventually, a few days later, died of tetanus, or lockjaw as we call it, a rather painful, excruciating death, or the descriptions of it. Anyway, this is Andrew Sim, his marker. You see the scroll. It is said that this scroll shows what has happened in the past and what will be. Of course, his scroll, if you will, metaphorically came to an end in the 1890s. His wife next to him with an identical stone. You remember when we began this tour, we referred to a line by, a couplet actually by Christopher Marlowe, in which he suggests that much of what we try to accomplish, is overruled by fate. And we tried to pick out examples of that here. And that included, in those lines, love and hate. It's hard to find a better example of what I think he was talking about than this one. 2 young men who came out to an outing with their fraternal organization at a lake, Penny's Pond. I think it's still there, just south of Raleigh, towards Garner. This is Beauregard Crocker, whose name is on this side of the marker, and John McMillan, whose name is on this side. And their story, very briefly, is here very hard to read, especially without the sun being more cooperative. They came to the outing, and they took a boat out onto the lake, along with a young lady, whose name was Annie or Nanny, depending on your preference, Mitchell. And they were paddling around the lake, she in her great billowing Victorian skirts, we're told, and the boat capsized. And in the confusion, the mass confusion of capsized boat, skirts, and we know pink ribbons that she had, and just the boys themselves trying to save her, they both drowned. Beauregard and John both drowned that day. She was rescued by another boater out there who only saw her pink ribbon floating on the water and was able to realize that she was beneath it, pulled her out, and she lived. The 2 boys died. But their fraternal organization put this monument out there for them, and it's quite a monument. You see, well, the leaves are covering it now, but as if they knew what we were going to say today, one of the symbols up there was a heart. And again, an example of fate overcoming what was really a gesture of love with the boys trying to save her and losing their lives in the process. There's also an anchor up there that stands for hope. So we like to think Christopher Marlowe was at least hopeful in his observation centuries ago. Well, that's the end of our Overruled by Fate tour. We hope you enjoyed it. You might say, in a way, fate worked on behalf of this cemetery, because if you really want to stretch it, you can say that the city cemetery, which is just a few blocks south of here, was filling up by the late 1860s, and something new was needed. And you just visited a part of it. We hope you've enjoyed it. Our next tour, we aren't exactly sure, but our thought at this point is to take one section of Oakwood Cemetery and focus on it, a good tight, geographically tight tour, if you will, and that means you won't have to walk as far. But you'll hear more about that, and you'll check check online, and we'll announce the details as soon as we know. Anyway, thank you for coming today. We enjoyed having you with us. And come and visit Oakwood Cemetery. Beautiful place.